let's get the one that at least every week our opportunity to get a little more educated on this, because everybody is still learning. It's amazing we're this far in and we're still trying to gather more information, and that's why every Friday we look forward to talking to Dr. Richard Pan, who's kind enough to join us each and every Friday. Dr. Pan, how are you?
Doing all right. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to kind of start there. We're hearing little tidbits of what could be exciting news with potential vaccines, potential medications. How excited, though, are you about that? Because it still seems like that's farther away.
Well, we are making progress day by day, week by week, but we still are, unfortunately, a long way. So we are seeing some what we call promising stuff, but promising is not definite. And so I think, as I mentioned before, we still need to do the studies. You still need to do the deep dive into the data and the research, and you still need to keep doing it. So it's good to be excited, but let's be careful.
I want to ask you something on that, and then I want to follow up, Dr. Pan, because this is absolutely in your wheelhouse. First thing, isn't the grand slam home run here that we find the cure, or at least the treatment, in a repurposed drug that kind of gets us past, as I understand it, a lot of the trials and a lot of the time that would have to be invested, because they have been trialed, they have been tested out and purposed for a different disease or a different virus? Isn't that what we ultimately, if we could snap our fingers, would be something like the ingredient in Pepsid all of a sudden taking care of this whole thing? Would that put us in a better position as far as your timeline?
Well, if there's an existing drug that can be repurposed, that drug has had at least safety studies done before, although not in this particular circumstance with COVID, so there's still some evaluation there. But I would point out that, while certainly people are looking at different things and that there may be some opportunities, at least nothing has popped up that looks like it's a definitive cure, as you say. So I think there's some trials that indicate that maybe something can help out a bit, but we're a long way from being able to say, hey, look, this repurposed drug or even a new drug is something that is what people might call a cure for this particular coronavirus.
Well, then my follow-up, and I brought this up last hour knowing you were going to come on. I'm very interested in the future and these future debates and conversations we're going to have, and I want your take on this, what you see in the future as best you can. Obviously, and I've said this before, you came to my attention and are one of my heroes through your education on vaccines and what you've done and worked for so many years in helping get rid of or combating all the fake news that's out there and making people understand the importance of being vaccinated. So you have this potential situation in the future that we hope for, which is that we get a vaccine. But as I'm sure you can see the tea leaves a little bit, we may be getting this vaccine a little earlier than maybe we quote-unquote should, because of the speed in which everything's going to be metered up, because you've got so many things going on and everybody wants to get restarted. So I find it interesting to see maybe two things in the future. Number one, the anti-vax crowd, if there is a vaccine, maybe all of a sudden coming back down to earth and logic and going, you know what, I'm going to take this vaccine, screw what I've been thinking, I need the vaccine. So that's a good thing. But then do you also worry that a year later, and I was, trying to be silly because I don't want to be too serious about it, somebody's growing an arm off their head or some sort of side effect that wasn't able to be saw because of the speed, and now all of a sudden you're back to anti-vaxxers having something to point to, and we're back in this whole spot again. How do you philosophically see the future there, and do you worry about that type of debate?
Well, first of all, the reason we're not going to have a vaccine next fall is partially because the safety studies need to be done, right? And also the efficacy studies. So we need to be sure it actually is safe and effective before it gets approval and is used in a widespread basis. So I think that it's important not to overly rush these things, and they won't be. Really, one of the challenges is that there is a lot of incentives for some companies to hype that they have a vaccine that'll be ready in a few months because there's such actually a large demand for something like that, and that might help their stock price. As people are speculating that would be something that they, if they were first out with a vaccine. But I think the reality is that we're not going to have a vaccine by next fall or even next year. So I've previously said 18 months at minimum, and the reason I say at minimum is that's only if everything goes right in all the studies, and that rarely happens. The other thing I should also point out with vaccines is that they're exploring a lot of different types of vaccines and candidates, we are going to have to evaluate and see which one is going to work best, and the first one out of the gate may not necessarily be the one that's the most effective. So then someone may come up with a improvement on that as well, and that's going to take some time. But ultimately, what we need to do is continue to get our public health pieces in place until we can get a safe and effective vaccine, and that involves both what we're doing now with the stay-at-home, but eventually getting to expanding our testing and doing the contact tracing and so forth, so we can actually control and contain the disease.
Dr. Richard Pan with us here on The Drive on Sports 1140 KHDK. Dr. Pan, this is kind of an offshoot of a question we had last week, and I had another one sent to me on social media, so I'll try to put them together. But the question basically was, is there any correlation to people that have had the flu shot, the flu vaccine, that maybe got COVID have done better? Is there any correlation between getting the flu shot, I guess, basically, and improve your chances of getting through COVID?
There probably isn't a link between getting a flu shot and doing better on COVID. Actually, there's some myths that have been the other way, too. Some people have said that if you get the flu shot, COVID gets worse, which isn't true either. What the flu shot does do is that it prevents you from getting the flu, or if you got the flu shot and you still were unfortunate enough to catch the flu, that the flu is much milder. You're less likely to end up in the hospital. So that's the value of getting the flu shot is that even if it doesn't entirely prevent the flu, it will, if you do catch the flu after you got the shot, you are more likely to get a much more mild form of the flu infection. And because flu and coronavirus are both respiratory diseases, they are two very different viruses, but some of the symptoms are similar. That basically, by reducing the amount of flu, reduce the burden on hospitals and so forth, and also reduces confusion about whether you might have the flu or the coronavirus. So it does help from a public health standpoint, and so I certainly would encourage people to get their flu vaccine from that standpoint, but I don't think it'd be accurate to tell people, because you got the flu vaccine, you're less likely to get coronavirus, at least at this point in time.
Dr. Richard Pan joining us. And Doc, it's such an important conversation. I just want to circle back real quick with one last follow-up. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the news right now, and that the headline is, Anthony Fauci said states are taking, quote, a significant risk by reopening too soon. That's just the quote on the screen. And I really don't want to try to get political here, but we also on record have the president, in talking about hydroxychloroquine, saying, listen, if people are dying, why not? Why not take a shot? I want to go back to what you said about the 18 months and the trial and the safety, and I am in no way disagreeing with you. But do you worry that in our political climate and in the climate in general, that as somebody who has educated so many people for the safety of vaccines, the relative safety compared to obviously not getting one, that we may find ourselves in a government-induced speed up, Operation Warp Speed, where some of the vaccination arguments may be hurt a little bit because the FDA, the government, and public pressure may skip a lot of hurdles and steps in rushing a vaccine or a treatment to the market. Is that something you worry about?
Well, certainly I am worried that people may actually view Well, I'd be worried that people would say, "Oh, when the vaccine came out, it's not safe because we tried to rush it," right? And actually, the FDA does have fairly stringent, has very stringent standards for vaccines and vaccine safety, and I think that physicians and scientists would argue strongly against actually lifting any of those for any sort of coronavirus vaccine specifically. And so I think it is important that people are confident about the vaccines that they get, or, by the way, any treatments as well. So I would point out that the FDA never said that hydrochloroquine was definitely, it's already approved because it's an existing drug, so it's one of those repurposed drugs. But certainly didn't say that, it is the preferred treatment, despite what the president said at the time for COVID. In fact, most physicians and scientists were urging that we actually do the trials. It was earlier, it was one of those promising ideas. Also, people recognized there were side effects to this particular drug as well, and unfortunately it's turned out in subsequent studies that probably the side effect is worse than any potential benefit from the drug for COVID right now. So, there may be still some further evaluation to see whether there might be some additional benefit, but I think at this point it appears that there is not. And so we're now exploring this for some other things, like you mentioned, the Pepcid, or some people have thought, maybe these heartburn medications might help, and so we need to explore that. And there's other things people are exploring as well. That remdesivir as well is something that people are looking at. And then, of course, the serum from people who've recovered from COVID is promising as well, as using that as a treatment. Obviously, there's a somewhat limited supply of that, but we're exploring various different options, but they all need to be carefully investigated to see what the actual benefit is. So the idea that, we'll just use it because it's better than nothing is probably not the best approach. But at the same time, as I said, that what you should do is that we should have people in appropriate trials so that we can try to get to figuring out what works as fast as possible. So I know it's kind of scary to say, well, you know what, I don't know what works right now, we're not sure. So what we want to do is we want to put you in a trial where you may get something or you may not, and but until we actually know what works, that's actually the best way to get to figuring that out.
Dr. Pan, are we any closer to getting medical proof, I guess, on a couple things that have been speculated on for a while, one being heat, temperature, humidity doing an impact on COVID-19? Do we have any more clarity on that? And also, if you have had it, do you have that chance to get it a second time? Do we have more proof or clarity on those two things?
We are still working on those things. So, fortunately, we probably do not have a definitive answer. In terms of whether in the summer this disease would get better, there seem to be increasing indications that probably isn't going to be the case, but we don't know for sure. It certainly seems like countries in which they are in essentially summer weather are in the tropics with warmer weather still are experiencing surges of this virus. So I think there's indications that, unfortunately, this isn't necessarily going to let up over the summer as some had hoped, because many coronaviruses are less infectious during the summer.
Dr. Pan, if you had autonomy throughout the nation and you were able to direct, whether it's federally or in individual counties and states, when you see this gradual reopening, I can't help but think I get why people want to go out and resume their lives. I'm one of them. But it doesn't seem that, other than maybe some flattening of the curve, nothing's changed with a treatment, nothing's changed with a cure. So for you, when you see the reopenings, would you follow suit? Do you believe we should still be across the board staying home? How do you feel when you look at these headlines about the reopenings in certain areas, including right here in California?
I would say is that we need to realize that there are certain benchmarks, and there is a path we can follow to try to reopen safely. And so it's not that this is just going to go on forever, and there isn't a way to figure out how to do that. So right now we are doing stay-at-home orders, and the reason for that is that the number of cases we have is still continuing to go up. We need to see a downturn in the number of cases, meaning that stay-at-home orders have been able to basically reduce the transmission of the disease enough that it's not continuing to spread. So that means you see a declining number of cases. The federal government, the president had talked about, you need to see 2 weeks of declining cases as being the sign that you can start doing some limited lifting of stay-at-home orders. And governor had outlined sort of a 4-stage process, right? We're in stage 1, where we're doing stay-at-home. There's a stage 2, where we can lift it somewhat. So we need to wait till we have the turnaround. And then we need to work hard on getting more testing. We are increasing our testing significantly, but we're still behind on testing. We still don't have enough testing. We need to have what's called contact tracing. So what we do is we test and we find out who's positive. So people are symptomatic. We're screening people in hospitals and nursing homes, other types of places where people may be congregating together, right? And then we're doing contact tracing, so anyone who's positive, we're identifying who they've been in contact with, and then we're testing them. And then for all the people who are positive, we're isolating them for up to 14 days to be sure that they don't continue to transmit the virus. So basically moving back to what we call now a mitigation strategy by basically going across the board and telling people to stay at home to one of containment, all right? But we can't start doing that until we have a decline in the cases. So there is a path to do this. In fact, one can sort of even put rough timelines to it, but it all depends on people doing the right thing, right? So we had projected that the sort of the peak of our curve is probably going to be somewhere around early to mid-May. So we kind of, for California, sort of at the peak of that curve that we flattened, okay? So we said flatten the curve. So hopefully when we see that decline in cases, we are going to then hopefully have our testing up and so forth, and then we can try to lift things up. So there is a path forward. I don't want anyone to think that, we're going to be like this forever in terms of what we're doing right now. And you know what? Maybe we can just open everything up, because we're just I can understand people are suffering and frustrated, right? Not just frustrated, but suffering, right? People are hoping that they can get their jobs back and they get their businesses going. Believe me, I understand that, but people aren't going to go shop or go to restaurants or movie theaters or do a lot of other things unless they feel like the virus is not going to continue to spread and basically make them or their families sick, and we don't overwhelm our hospitals. So we do have to have the resolve to continue on this path, but there is a path forward that can lead us to a place where we can resume a lot more activity safely, but it requires us to continue to work to create that situation with adequate testing, which we are making significant increases in, to be able to do contact tracing, which we are working very hard on, and then isolation. And so that's hopefully we can get to that place sometime in the summer. But if we just lift things open right now, the problem is the virus starts spreading, and as it spreads, we're going to have a bump up in hospitalizations and deaths, and that's going to actually make things even more delayed than they are now.
Well, Dr. Pan, this always flies by. We always appreciate your insight, helping us answer some of these questions. We look forward to doing it again next Friday. Thank you. Stay safe, and we really do appreciate your time.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Doc.